Rapport is one of the greatest phenomenons of social dynamics. You can take anything and transition from it, right? So if you can get to rapport, if you can get there quickly, you can basically move to seduction. You can move to building a social network. You can move to doing better in a job interview, whatever. Any social dynamic can actually be transitioned from rapport, and very easily. And what we're teaching today is rapport cycling. In week 7, we're covering the structured conversation that will teach you to use yourself in about 2 minutes, express that, elicit using that, and share an amazing connection, which is irreplaceable. Now, the recipe for success, now that we're 7 weeks into TSL, is still, the same. 3 things. Show up on the calls, interact. It's an interactive program because that's how we teach. We teach exactly what we preach, right? Is to exchange. Let us help you. Let the alumni push you in the direction that's going to help you. I mean, they've had the same problems as you. Maybe I have as well. And we've overcome them. And that's how we work as a group. We build a community here. Now, number 2 is we do our assignments and exercises. Daily is always better than the 1-week blitz. If we can spend 5 minutes a day saying hello, giving, doing the TSL dailies, if we can be the observer and build our social intelligence, if we can do the honesty exercise, then we have moved to an area where we are building social intelligence and we can apply the social dynamic, which brings us into the 3rd, which is to take the theory into application. That's how we evolve it. That's how you express, and that's how you build your amazing, beautiful, unique expression of who you are, which is the better man. If you are not on TSL Online, I would say upgrade to it because that'll get you on the calls and will help you out tremendously. That being said, let's enjoy this lesson. You're going to learn some good stuff right here. Pay attention, get your pens and papers ready, and go out and apply it. Okay, guys, so this is what we have here. TSL Online Lesson 3 Connecting Workbook 4, Complete Guide to Deep Rapport and Meaningful Connections. Last week, we went over the first part of this. This week, we're going over the second part. And like you guys have heard, this is some of the best stuff out here. Okay, rapport cycling. Now, last week, we defined this as I'm not going to give you the exact definition, but a structured conversation that will get you into rapport and qualification. In fact, it will achieve rapport and qualification. We went into the definitions of what those are. Qualification mainly meaning that how we're meant to interact. That is defined. This person's good for me in that way. I'm good for them in this way. Both of us have achieved that point of qualification. Rapport is when I care about what you think and you care about what I think is established. We lose the need for superficiality. We start communicating with meaning. That means we communicate with our emotions. They communicate with their emotions. We communicate with our sexuality. They communicate with their sexuality. We communicate with the deeper purpose and identities of ourselves. And how cool is that? As we learn rapport cycling this week, in a matter of a few minutes, and really, if it's taking you 10, 15 minutes to get into a rapport cycle, you're doing something wrong. You need to, if that's happening, you need to speak up on the calls. You need to ask questions. And you need to see how it can move better in those situations. There might be a particular situation where it takes a little bit longer, but if you're face to face with somebody, it should take you 2 minutes to get into a rapport cycle. You can open. You should be. In fact, that's a better way to learn this. Just start opening with rapport cycles as we're going to learn them today. And you'll have great communication with people. You'll be talking and interacting with, playing with, enjoying a deeper persona of a person, and they'll be the same with you. So basically, rapport cycling is very, very simple, okay? Yet it can get very complex, okay? All we need for it are some topics. We need a structure, and we have some templates for you. But that's all you really need to really get this. And if I were to tell you one thing that's most important, it's these topics. It's the first one. And those topics are all based off of you. They're all based off of your identity workbook. You need to crack that open. Look at the things you wrote about. The good and the bad all can be rapport cycles. In fact, the things that you might think are bad or not appropriate for people are usually the best things to talk about. Not because it's the technique of vulnerability, but because it's so real and so you that it would be impossible for you not to talk about your debt, your lack of sexual experience, your mistakes you made in life without really being yourself. Okay. And so those topics are really great things to talk about because a lot of people can relate with them. Nobody's really talked to them about it before. And man, it's an expression of you. Don't be ashamed of it. There really is no shame. I mean, I'm a human being. I feel bad about a lot of stuff here and there, but I try and live by certain principles that we teach in here. And man, I've never been proven wrong. Um, it's just a great way to go. True expression of self. The structure, we're going to learn a couple different structures, but they're very simple. The structure in itself is really building a dance of conversation around, some questions and some expressions of yourself. It's very, very simple and very easy. Of course, it can get complex, and we can move into all sorts of really, really cool conversations in it, and even start utilizing some of the things we learned last week, which aren't really advanced, but they can become extremely advanced if we start implementing those into our cycles. And we're going to give you a couple templates, which are going to be helpful. I would say pick one template. Don't get confused with all of them, and use those as a guide for you to move in. So check this out. This will be really simple, nice and sweet for you. You guys should be able to tackle it right away, get some pen to paper action on this, and start applying it. And if you're having trouble, by all means, that's what the calls are for. That's what you're here to interact with us and workshop this stuff on. Try it. Get to a point where you can try it and be functional with it. It will help you so much. I can't emphasize that enough. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to choose a topic. Okay, we're going to choose a topic based on our life experience. Go to the identity workbook for that. And here I actually say pick two topics, one you're comfortable with and one you're uncomfortable with. It's always a good start. If I work with anybody live in field, that's one of the first things I say. What's one thing that you would, first off, I'd say, well, what do you notice about that girl? What do you notice? Get in touch with your urge. Get in touch with your want. Get in touch with your desire as a man. You may not say it to her, but let's get in touch with it. And let's have that motivate us. Now, as you get in touch with that urge, what is something from yourself you would want to share with her that you might think she'd be responsive to? It's one thing you'd be proud of. And then what's one thing that you'd be afraid of talking to her about? All right, let's figure out some patterns of conversation to open with that, pretty much opening with a rapport cycle. And let's try it out. And man, let me tell you, independent of the result of that person, the simple expression of yourself honestly in a way with somebody understanding it, they might determine that you're not qualified for them and say, oh man, I don't really like that, but you won't get this judgment. You won't get this turning away. You won't get this rejection. And the simple act of being able to express and being able to be understood, that is the social equilibrium you need to be at. That is where the relief, that is where the beauty, that is where you start to open up. That is where you start to realize the beauties of being social. And if you can get to that step of connection, then you can get to some pretty awesome, you could get to some advanced social dynamics, but you can also get to a great expression of seduction with that. Okay, so that's very fundamental with us. So we're just basically going to choose some topics. We're going to learn how to plug that into a rapport cycle. Now, what I do for you here with topics is I give you some of mine. And ultimately, you need to go for your own. You need to find your own. You need to be yourself. I mean, as you know, if you show up on the calls and you're just using templates of what I'm giving you or my previous conversations, the guys are going to be like, what are you doing? You need to discover what it is you like to talk about. But check this out. My topics that I like to hit are pretty simple. In fact, if you really want to know my topics, I'm going to talk to people about not even all this. I'm going to talk about passions, purpose, ideals. Actually, I will hit identity. I haven't hit personal change in a while. Sexuality is probably number one. Masculine and feminine roles is probably number two. Fears, insecurities, family, those are, important. I used to use them a lot, but man, it would be sexuality, masculine and feminine roles, and I'd say these four in a very subcategory way. Now, as we're going to learn the structure of rapport cycling, it generally starts out with a question. All right. So basically, we need to get on these topics. So if you do want to use some templates of conversation, it's pretty simple. And I mean, you'll get the recipe here pretty easily. If you at all can understand the English language, this should be simple for you. So if I were to go to passions, I could literally open somebody. Okay, it doesn't matter what it is. Isolation is always important in any social dynamic. We talk about that like crazy. But I can open and say, hey, I have a question for you. What are you passionate about? That could be the beginning of that's how simple it is. Let's say you have a question about sexuality. Well, sometimes people get offended with sexuality, but really everybody does want to talk about it. And actually I have that as an example here. What is sexuality to you? But I could actually do my initial question, as we call our opening question. I could say, hey, I have a question for you. How do you express yourself in this world? Like we talk about ideals, we talk about our passions, we talk about what we really believe in, our relationships, our sexuality. How does all that come into play? That could be my initial way of bringing it up. For me, it's kind of easy because I'm always talking about sex. I mean, every day I talk about sex for hours just because it's my job. And I could easily go up to any woman and say, hey, it's my job to talk about sex. I'm a professional at it. And man, I talk about it a ton. And ask somebody a question, they'd feel very open with me. But if I didn't have that job, or before I was comfortable stating it, in fact, there were some TSL guys talking about this. How do we share and represent, what we do and how we live? There shouldn't be an issue, but it's very easy to bring up these topics. Hey, I have a question for you. How do you express yourself? Well, how do you express yourself with your personality, with the people that you're intimate with? What is expression? Is that being social? Is that being sexual? Is that being, very emotional? What does that mean to you? And of course, somebody might feel uncomfortable, but the social dynamic here, and actually the social dynamic of rapport cycling, that means the methodology of what we're using, is simply allowing somebody to understand you. And if they understand you, they can open up to you. They can start sharing and exchanging themselves with you. So here's some examples of how to start off all this sort of stuff. Simple questions. And don't overthink it. I'm going to tell you right now, you don't need a lot of crazy social dynamics and methodology to go in and initiate a conversation with somebody. If you're in a nightclub, what's the number one thing? Be a part of the nightclub. Be a part of the environment. You like to dance, you like to have fun, you like to drink, you like to, party, be loud, smile at other people, say, hey, man, what's going on? I actually have a question for you. Okay, it has to do with ideals, and we're in this like crazy environment, but what is your ideal life? They may not be able to answer the question in that environment, and so we'd say, but you know what, you seem pretty cool, like come over here, like I want to ask you, like come over here where it's quiet, get your isolation, ask it again. No, the reason why I'm asking is like I want to know people's ideal lives, like you're a beautiful woman, blah 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 blah. You can move into it very easily. Okay, if you're at a cafe, hey, I don't mean to bother you, I know you're studying, but like I have a question about male and female roles. What does being a woman mean to you? I know it's a deep question, but well, do you have a few minutes or no? Well, I mean, this will only take a second, but what does that mean to be a woman? Like, is there a definition to it, or what is there? And then you can move on to the rest of your cycle, which would be the ground. All right. Anyway, those are examples for you. Very simple. As long as we're comfortable in the environment, we can move within the environment. We don't need to think about all this crazy stuff and high five 10 people and
build up a jealousy plot line and then somehow have enough momentum for somebody to pay attention to us. We need to realize that we're the value and can get attention, generate attention from what we already have and the environment that we're in. All right? Very important stuff there. Okay, so let's look at designing our topic because this is very important. Like when we're looking at the stuff like family, insecurities, whatever it is, we need to know the direction where we're going and we need to know how to make that work. All right. So let's look at our motives. All right. Actually, I have quite a few examples here. And I apologize for this. I see that I should have enlarged this a little bit. You may not be able to read this very well on the recording, the video portion, but consult your notebook because it's all there. Um, in any case, the thing is that when we have our topics, we need to know the directions that we're moving in. We also need to know our motives. Do we want to have a sexual life with people that, we're not too attached to? We don't have a motive for a relationship. Do we want a relationship? Do we like to interact with emotions more? What are our motives? And those can be tough to determine. And that's also why we have the component of service within our programs where we get to talk and, men being honest with other men about what we want. We can really discover the roots of that because it's tough. A lot of times we say we don't want a relationship, but we're emotionally connecting with women and building intense sexual connections with them to the point where it makes a relationship very easy to fall into. Or let's say we're looking for a relationship, but we're dating 4 people at once and not giving them the attention they need or whatever it is. I mean, there's no judgment. You can be whatever you want. It's just how can we express ourselves and our sexuality in the best possible way. So we need to know what we want. And also we need to know the direction that we need to move these topics in. For instance, if I go back and pick some of these topics like ideals or identity or sexuality, what would show that that person is qualified to talk to me? What would show that that person really is somebody that I would like to talk to? Okay, how are they passionate? Are they just passionate about art or do they actually live their passions? There's a lot of people who say they're passionate, but they don't actually uh, make their life about that. And so the more we explore that topic, the more we'll know exactly how somebody would be qualified, you know. And as we'll get to it, the the definitions and so on. In fact, this is actually what I mean by directing your topics to have the end in mind. If I'm going to ask somebody about fun and adventure, I don't want to just talk about their version of fun and adventure. I want to hear their version of fun and adventure, but I want to hear their version of fun and adventure based on what I value. If I value fun and adventure, being that they're a free spirit, they're willing to go wherever the drop of the hat, and I mean like out of the country. They all they need is a passport and $100. They don't need this huge savings. They don't need all this planning. They're just willing to do and experience. That would be my personal Steve version of fun and adventure. Everybody says they love fun and adventure, but if they have to stay at the Hyatt and plan all this stuff and get all this catering and bring their whatever entourage or servant or whatever with them, that is not what I have as my end in mind. That person is not somebody that's qualified to talk to me, and I'm not qualified to talk to them. They could go talk to somebody else. But I want to drive my discussions in that area. If I have a viewpoint on sexuality, everybody has a viewpoint on sexuality, but it might be very different from, let's say, somebody who is lesbian. The only thing I have in common with them is that I love women. But the thing is we're just coming from a different angle. We have a different motive. We have a different idea of what the definition of all this is. And so I want to have my clear goals mapped out. We could think about all that. We could think about that all we want, but in reality, we're only going to really know what we want by interacting and talking with people and gaining some experience with it. It's really cool, actually. The more you do this stuff and connect with people on this level, the more you're going to find that you're better at it precisely directing a conversation in an area that you want. It's beautiful. And the way you'll get faster at that, again, is interacting with the people on this program who have some experience. All right, let's actually get into the structure of rapport cycles and the real meat of it. Okay. This is very, very, very important. Every rapport cycle, and I'm sorry, this should be bigger as well. Every rapport cycle is, there we go. Yeah. Every rapport cycle has 4 qualities to it. And there's all different sorts of ways you can move this stuff around. Okay. So you can move it around and add in like some bait in between and, do some complex stuff, do some push pull in certain areas or within the grounds and all that fancy stuff. But let's just look at it very, very simply. Number 1, there's an opening question or qualifier. Okay. Very simple. We start off by asking a question. In an opening sequence, that could be an opinion opener. In a sequence where we are like just in a conversation, let's say we got introduced to somebody or we opened in a direct way or whatever, it doesn't matter, but we want to move more towards rapport and qualification. Once again, like kind of within 2 minutes of most interactions. If it's taking longer than 10, you got some work to do. But we can initiate it by asking a question. We can say, hey, you know what? We've been talking here for a second, but where's your favorite place to travel? All right. So very simple. We just ask a question. That's going to start guiding us in a direction that we want to move in. Qualifiers, questions are turning points in conversations. They're great. They're beautiful. You're going to really see how to use them more and more as you latch onto this. The second thing is the ground. Okay. We hear a lot about grounds, and we'll discuss it a little bit more thoroughly here, but a ground is generally your perspective. It could be a story about you, it could be a story about someone else, or it could just be an opinion or a perspective on something. Okay. Very simple, but it's in all of this, it's all based on you. It should be a story about your life or a story about somebody else's life that you're familiar with, possibly close to you, or a perspective that you believe in. And in fact, all of it should just empower some sort of perspective that you believe in. All right. So the third component, which is very, very, very instrumental, and you can get a refined art to it, or you can just be really simple with it, is the challenge. Okay. And this is just a heavier voicing of a qualifier. Okay. So that challenge really moves to what you wanted. Okay. Remember how I said you want to have the end in mind? The challenge is truly the voicing of that, moving towards that end. You may not be able to get there. Sometimes it'll take you like 2 or 3 cycles to actually get to where you want to get, but the challenge is very good. Okay. And then there's the definition. And the definition is just how we define this relationship. Now, most of the time, what's going to happen, and in many of the examples that we're going to give, in fact, I'll give you 2 examples right now, we're going to revolve around the opening question, the ground, and the challenge. And sometimes that just might cycle. Opening question, ground, challenge, to the next ground, to the next challenge, to the next ground, to the next challenge. So what you'll see is like opening question to start it off, and then there's no more opening questions. Then we ground, then we challenge, then we might ground again, then we challenge, then we ground again, then we challenge, and it can cycle around like that in the simplest form of rapport cycling. Let me just give you a quick example. The most simplest thing would be opening question and challenge being the same. And this is where you're going to see the power of the structure. But if I just say, hey, what are you really passionate about? They answer, whatever. You say, well, look, I'm really passionate about a lot. Like I've had my own business for a while, but also I've worked as an artist. And I'm very passionate about expression. Like my business is like totally different than, what I thought or what I was involved in when I was involved in the arts, but they both come down to expressing who I am and what I believe in. They're very important. So let me ask you this, like, what are you passionate about? So I started off with, what are you passionate about? I explained myself. I shared my perspective on it. And then I asked them what they're passionate about. But the second time I asked it, it seemed more powerful. All right. So that was really the simplest way that I started using this when I came to discover this kind of phenomenon of socialization. But when I got a little bit more creative, actually came, and here's the story. I was in my buddy Alex in Las Vegas. He was in Ed. We were talking to a lady who was a little bit older, very accomplished, very experienced. It was what you would consider she embodied good looks, but a lot of confidence and a lot of class. And we were talking to her, and we're all trying to get her attention. Ed was going a little bit better in this direction, and Alex was going a little bit better in that direction. Basically, three guys talking to one girl. And she just stopped us. She said, "Hey, you know what? I want to let me just cut you guys off." And she said, "Let me ask you a question. What is important in your life? What gives you meaning?" And we hadn't been talking that long. I mean, it was like basically 5 minutes or so. And she just cut us off. She's like, "Man, I want to know what you guys are all about. You guys seem cool, but I want to know what you guys are all about. Let me ask you a question. What gives you meaning in life?" All of us, well, not all of us, but one at a time, we start talking about, how awesome our lives are and how meaningful they are and all that sort of stuff. And she just cuts us off, okay, when she's heard enough. And she basically had this demeanor of like, "Let me put you guys on the level of the question that I'm really asking here." She basically was sub communicating that. And then she said, "Look, when I was 26 or whatever age she was, I got in a car accident. I was really active. I was doing all these things in my life. And I remember when I was loaded into the ambulance, the paramedics were talking about how I was going to die. And I swore to myself that if I lived, I was going to be successful. And I was beaten up. My life was wrecked. My life was all the things that I could do, I couldn't do anymore. After I healed, I went through physical rehabilitation. It was like, my body was different. My mind was different. Everything had changed. And I came into some money. I was able to turn that into a successful business. And now I live a life that is better than I had lived before. I have a life with purpose. I have a life with meaning. I have all those things. So let me actually ask you guys again, what gives you meaning in your life? And all of a sudden we were like, holy shit, fuck, man, we just got qualified. We just got challenged. And in fact, that's what was said afterwards, after we left and, realized we were, we were impressed. We were floored. We were within this woman's realm of communication. And if we were going to talk to her, we had to speak within that realm of communication. And we were like, man, she challenged us. And in order to have that conversation, we rose to it. Now, from that point on, I started tinkering with this idea, especially talking with Alex about just different theory and stuff. And it was like, wow, man, how could I turn this into a form of communication? And this is really what rapport cycling turned out to be. Now, it doesn't have to just be within that voicing or template or whatever, but in its simplest form, that's how I learned it. And as you see, she ended there with a definition. Like, if you guys are going to talk to me how I want to talk to you, and then we can talk, and then it's good. So, whoa, what the hell happened here? Let me pause for 1 second. Well, computer screen dropped out there really quick, but basically it was this idea that if we could present ourselves in the right way, and it didn't have to be a superlative story. It didn't have to be a story that, had to do with death and purpose in life. It could be a real story, about our lives that might even be plain. It could work. And I really started messing around with it, and man, it's turned into such an animal of communication to where I could talk about anything and say, man, this was on my mind today, but how do you guys know how to make a good decision? Because, we were driving home, we had a doctor's appointment, and we were passing by all these food places. We were hungry, we had to eat, and it was like, where are we going to eat? And it turned into this like crazy expression of confusion, of not being able to talk and say what we wanted and voice that, when really we had to satisfy our hunger. And I was thinking about it because I was teaching today, and I was like, man, I do this in many ways in my life. I confuse myself with what I think I want rather than finding my fulfillment and moving on to the existence which is really good in my life. So that's what I want to talk about. Like, how is it that you make decisions that are clear in your mind and have meaning? That to me is something which is really, 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 an important tool when it comes to communicating yourself and interacting with other people. So that's really what we want to do. In any case, guys, let's get into this. So as we talk about here, look, the opening question, the opening qualifier, it has one simple function. It's very, very simple. Okay, really simple. It's to get you on a topic that you want to talk about. It doesn't have to be on the topic, but it has to get you there. Its purpose is to get you talking with them, right? Its purpose is so that you can have a conversation. And that's really it. Okay. Where we can get a little bit crazy is here in the ground. Okay. And right now with the ground, I want you guys to keep it simple. As we talked about, it's a perspective that's based on you. You need to believe in it. And it should be either a story about you, a story about somebody else, or your overall perspective. And it's really always going to encase your perspective and opinion. And then here we have a couple of examples. I'm not going to cover them just yet. And actually, we go into a little bit more depth here about how to make it a little bit more complex. Definitely look at those. Definitely study it. But the ground is very important. There's also another thing about the ground, which if you're having trouble with, please show up and workshop these. On our workshopping calls, we'll make them awesome for you. Man, I don't know why this keeps shutting off. So basically, on the ground, you're expressing who you are. That's your point in where you do that. If you are having trouble with it, don't want to go to challenge there too quick. If you're having trouble with it, what you need to do is add a few parts to your ground. Like, for instance, if it is something that's a little bit of a touchy subject, for instance, the reason why we added this in here was not the ground, but these components to it are, I had a client who was asking me, like, man, I'm afraid of being judged. So he'd ask somebody, what do you think about judgment and social judgment? And then he'd talk about how he was bullied at school and how he was afraid of being judged and he didn't want to be judged. And then the person would just give him advice. That's not the point of this. We're not there to, we'll take advice, but we're really there to express ourselves and to get expression from somebody else, not a reaction. Okay, reaction is like advice that they're detached from. I want to talk to their real selves. I want to talk about how they don't need to talk about how they're judged, but they could talk about how they solved it, not necessarily what they think about my life from a detached perspective. But I want to know who they are, using my own life. So basically, a few things that you could add to it is share your perspective, state why you're asking them specifically, and also lead in the direction that you want to go in. So, for instance, in the example I gave of the woman in Las Vegas, she said, so I don't want to talk to people about stupid stuff. I want to talk to people about meaning. She's driving this voicing of the conversation towards that. So if we went to the judgment thing, well, I was bullied at school, people picked on me. It was a horrible experience. But I want to know how people solved that. I want to know how people lived with that. In fact, you personally, I want to know how you dealt with that. And so see how we say the direction that we're moving in. I want to know the solution. And we also want to know from them specifically. We want to know from who they are. So pretty important there. Now when we move to the challenge, this is the third part of the rapport cycle. The challenge is very important. This gives it its overall voicing, okay? And the overall voicing is really pushing in that direction. As we found out, we could ask the same opening question and have the challenge be the same, or we could change them. We could say something like, hey, I have a question about like, uh, how people think and perceive the world. But look, okay, so I was watching this documentary. Here's my ground. I was watching this documentary on the universe, and Michio Kaku was talking about this, and then was talking about all these theories of quantum physics, and man, it blew my mind. The potential of how much we have and who we are in this world, and how we're all interconnected. Now, if I wanted to change to a different challenge there, if I knew the direction that I wanted to generally speak to people in had to do about their sexuality and their personal expression of that sexuality, I could do that with my challenge. I could actually get very creative with it. So, I could say like, hey, I forget what my opening question was. Like, hey, what do you guys think about, how we live, like the way we live? And I go on and on about this documentary I watched about the theory of the universe, how it builds, and quantum physics, and all this sort of stuff. And I go, man, that was just nuts. Like when it came down to quantum physics and and how we're all interconnected. Let me actually ask you this. Like, let me actually ask you this. Like, what is it that makes you connect with somebody and have a relationship with them? Like to feel close to them. Like, how does that work? How does that affect your image of yourself and your sexuality and how that's, felt by somebody else? So my challenge really moves, it really moves me in the directions that I want to be in. It's very important, strikingly important. Um, Now we go to this last part, which is the definition, which may not come so quickly. Like a lot of times, if I do a rapport cycle for myself, my goal isn't to get to the definition as quick as possible. My goal is to effectively communicate to somebody. So a lot of times I'll do a process of a question, ground, question, ground, question, ground, then to the definition. And how the definition is determined, as I said before, and even in last week's lesson plan when it came to qualification, was that we want to know how we're qualified to talk to one another. We want to know how we're going to work together. Is this a girl that is, somebody that we date, somebody that could be a girlfriend, somebody that could be just a sex partner, somebody that we're not sure about yet, but we are attracted to him, somebody that is going to do our taxes? How is this person qualified? How am I qualified to talk to them? As soon as we know what that is, it is in our best interest to define that. Oh, okay, you're somebody that I have a superficial conversation with. That would probably piss some people off. But the lady in Vegas, that was something that, she was prepared to say. That was a voicing that okay, are you guys, somebody that I talk to deep with and connect with and have an experience with, or are you somebody that we have a superficial conversation with? And she did define it. I mean, she did define where she wanted to go, and how she wanted to talk. And as soon as we were able to express it, it was like, okay, yeah, cool. So let's have this conversation. Okay, we're good in this way. Now, it doesn't always have to be that aggressive, but let's say I talk to somebody and I say, hey, what's the meaning of life? And they're like, well, why would you ask that question? I said, well, look, I work with people, my life's purpose is how I connect with people. Yeah, I can have different things, I can create different things, but if I can't share them and interact and evolve with other people on that, then it's pointless to me. So, like, how do you make friends? Let me now challenge you and move on. How do you make friends? Like, what's a great quality in making friends with somebody? They sort of tell me, and because they don't know me, they can't fully express it. And then I say, well, look, basically, people that really are warm and like me, and we have commonalities, they can be friends with me. But who my real friends are people that can get in touch with my deepest values and get in touch with how I see and perceive who I am and what gives me meaning and I mean like what I really really love as let me ask you, like, what do you love as a human being? What are your ideals, and what do you how do you live by them? Like, what's one time when really doubted yourself, but believed in something and went for what you believed in. And at that point, because we've been talking for a little bit, they feel a little bit more comfortable with me. They feel it's an awesome phenomenon, actually. You guys should try. They'll most likely open up more, or maybe in another cycle, another ground I'd give, they could open up again. But let's say they open up to me and they go, man, that's a good question. Man, I'll tell you what I really believe in. I'll tell you how I act on it. But I really believe in, you know, having a good positive message with people. That sounds too simple, but you know how I do that is like when I'm talking to somebody like face to face, like I'm talking to you, I give them my real self and my attention. Now, if that was something that I like to hear, if that's something that I valued, I would define it. I would say, "Wow, wow, you just that man. I completely, agree with you. I believe exactly what you believe. We should hang out. We should talk." That's my definition. Okay. So I put an end on it. I don't necessarily put an end on it so that we can no longer have a conversation. I put an end on it so we can change topics, so we could talk about something else, so that we could naturally evolve. Without the definition point, without the completion of the act and its function being established, the act will then turn into ambiguity. So, for instance, let's look at this in between sex and relationships. If we're just carnally having sex with somebody, and nobody comes to a point of completion, and we can't come to a point of completion, we end up being frustrated about the sexual experience, meaning we don't ejaculate, they don't come, neither one of us gets off in any way. There's no finality to it. And of course, people always talk about in sex delaying the finality, delaying the orgasm is being better. Of course, it's great. But if you don't have that orgasm, she doesn't have that orgasm. Nobody has an orgasm. Nobody has the completion of it. It will be ill-defined and turn into ambiguity. Same thing with a relationship. If you guys keep doing the things that are happening in a relationship, but there's no real definition, there's no real commitment from either person, it will spin off into all sorts of different things, and mainly confusion. So we want to define our conversations. When we get to a point when we know we like somebody and we like them in a certain way, even if you aren't sure if they feel it or not, you need to state it. You need to move in that direction. Very, very key. I'm actually going to pause the recording here and, well, let me give it a second. But these are actually some templates of rapport cycles that we have here. Now, read these on your own, look at them, explore them. I don't want to cover them here in the lesson plan because I don't want you to overthink it. What I want you to do is go back to your week 6 assignments and exercises and do that template. Now, as you come on the workshopping calls, we can explore these different ones. The challenge, qualify to define, 5-point rapport, the cycle, and vague to deep. We can talk about all those on the workshopping calls, and they're actually described, and there's plenty of examples within here. But I want you to keep it simple for now. And the reason why I want you to keep it simple is because, man, it's it's great. It's such an easy, simple way of communication and connection with people that if you get active in it, it'll make a lot more sense than if you are not able to get active in it and get bogged down by all the complexities and different nuances of the whole gosh darn thing. So that all being said, let's pause this. If I could actually scroll up, which it's not letting me do. Let's pause this. Let's get into the Q&A portion of it, and let's make some badass connections with people. Cool stuff.
Okay, so there we have it, the branded amazing technique of rapport cycling, which you can start doing right now, and I would recommend it. Stay on the exercises, get social, be talking to people. That's very, very important. You can always be saying hello. You can always be observing. You can always be making observational statements. You can always be challenged. You can always be doing the honesty exercise. You can always be active in those ways. But if we can simply start to take our identity and work it into a conversation, elicit some value, get that tipping point of rapport in there, we will have amazing connections. We'll have a better life. And in all areas of our life, we'll see some pretty awesome improvement. So let's get to work on it. I'm definitely excited. Week 7 is in the books. Now you just got to apply it. All right. We'll see you next week, guys.